Welcome back. Nothing seems more fun than watching old movies with friends and family during midsummer, especially when it's too hot to go outside. In this segment, we will review three recommendations that had been long forgotten: Scooby-Doo, Pacific Rim, and Starship Troopers. To review the movies, we are joined by film critic Van Connor. Van, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nashim. It's a pleasure. Thank you for letting me to talk about such fun movies as these three, because what wants to talk about?
Yeah, so starting with Scooby-Doo, we're not mad, of course, but we have questions. Scooby-Doo was amazing as cartoons, but the movie, unfortunately, was not loved as much as the cartoons. Being a film critic, how would you decode the reasons?
I think it's a movie that is very much ahead of its time and misunderstood. You remember Scooby-Doo came out in 2002.
Yes.
Its director, Roger Gosnell, was just coming off of having directed two big hits. He directed Never Been Kissed and Big Mama's House, which were pretty decent, hits. It had a very young screenwriter who was an unknown commodity at the time by the name of James Gunn, who kept trying to crowbar subtle, very adult references into the script, and they would remove them. And eventually he would manage to slip one or two through. And he's someone that would become known for Guardians of the Galaxy and this month's The Suicide Squad reboot. A very huge name now. But if you go back and you watch that first Scooby-Doo movie now, you can absolutely see that very biting, very horror-friendly talent that's just desperately trying to emerge from this, I think, quite clever and very meta film.
Right. Do you think that it was underrated? Because it had cast like Freddie Prinze Jr., Matthew Lillard, Atkinson, but still it could not, go to that level where it had to be or it deserved to be. So do you think it was underrated and the movie itself was not that bad?
I think it was hugely underrated. First of all, if you go and you try to cast the Scooby Gang, the Mystery Inc. gang now, you will never get it as right as they did with this. Linda Cardellini as Velma is just note perfect, 100% A-grade casting. Freddie Prinze Jr. as Fred Rogers, it works so well. We didn't think it would, but it does. Even Sarah Michelle Gellar as Daphne. But of course, it's all about Matthew Lillard. And Matthew Lillard, now is a middle-aged character actor on things like Good Girls on TV. But he was so perfect in Scooby-Doo, known largely at the time for things like She's All That and the Scream movies, obviously, as well.
And the resemblance was uncanny between the cartoon characters and the characters that are, played in the movie. It was amazing.
I think they're quite nicely updated as well. I think they do sort of 2002 eyes their look. They sort of bring them into the Sugar Ray. What I would refer to as the Sugar Ray here, because Sugar Ray actually do cameo. If you remember the band Sugar Ray, do actually cameo in the film as themselves in just this weirdly brilliant sort of moment of patronizing teen pandering, which I really love, because that is what the movie is about how pop culture brainwashes teenagers. One of the few films at the time that did this. Josie and the Pussycats was another great example of a Hanna-Barbera animated property doing the same kind of thing.
Right. To some critics, this movie is somewhere between a live-action cartoon that's much too scary for the kids and a Saturday Night Live sketch that goes on too long for most teens. That's what you get when you try to reach both younger and older audiences. What is your take on that?
I disagree entirely. First of all, I think it's actually very possible to reach both older and younger audiences alike. And I think literally look at the cinema of Dwayne Johnson. It's entirely crafted around the concept of reaching old and young alike. I think with Scooby-Doo, there is a certain level of sniffiness to it, especially critically. It's not a criticism that's changed over the years either, not even in a revisionist sense with the subsequent success of James Gunn.
Right. And now moving to our next movie, Pacific Rim, which is declared to be too loud and action-packed mixed version of Godzilla meets Transformers. What do you think about that?
But I think Godzilla and Transformers, I can sort of, I think it's a bit lazy, of a lazy comparison. I would have gone with Top Gun meets Power Rangers. Wow. It seems to be the more adequate one, because it is basically the exact plot of Power Rangers, but played as if it's as serious as Top Gun. And just loud, crashy, kaiju smashing fun from, visionary director Guillermo del Toro. I know they throw that term around a lot now. You don't see a DC trailer without visionary director Zack Snyder written on it, which is being very loose with that term. But, Guillermo del Toro really is. You look at films he's made, look at Pan's Labyrinth, you look, of course, the Best Picture winning The Shape of Water, and think, if that man's going to make Top Gun meets Power Rangers, that's something worth seeing.
Yeah, and probably one of the best movies of its own category, if not the best. Toro is an amazing director, and you clearly can see how much heart and brain he puts into his movies. About Pacific Rim, how engaging do you think the story seems to be?
I absolutely do. I mean, it's one of those movies. I love Pacific Rim, in spite of the fact that its lead actor is terrible in it. And he's carried by a pretty game supporting cast. I like Charlie Hunnam as an actor, as a personality, generally quite a bit. He is not a shining star in Pacific Rim, however. It is his supporting cast who are. It is Charlie Day, it is Bern Gorman. It is particularly Idris Elba, who gets one of the rousing speeches of all disaster movies. He gets one that rivals Independence Day in this. If you just name drop Pacific Rim to people, one of the first things they will say is, we are cancelling the apocalypse.
And visuals will have to be this film's calling cards, according to some critics. What do you have to say about that?
I would say that those critics need to get out more and develop a sense of humor, because I had a blast with it.
Like, are you talking in favor, or like this was yet another joke to you?
To be honest, Pacific Rim is a movie that you knew before you ever saw. Before you saw the finished film, just for the trailer alone, you knew this movie was opening with nothing but a barrage of critically derisive reviews, and then there are going to be a small contingent of people under 40 who managed to have some fun with it. You know, who had grown up with Power Rangers and had grown up on Top Gun, things like that. The problem is if we're being really, really honest, the average film critic is 45 plus, if we're being charitable. It's not a film that skews above a certain age. I have younger friends who are fanatical about Pacific Rim, who even like the sequel that I think is pretty terrible. I've never seen the animated series, I admit, but I have seen the sequel. Not a great one, although still arguably better than Independence Day 2.
There are 4 more parts released after that. There are like 5 in total. Like making one after another.
I know Avatar has like 5 of them now, I think. We've got those to come, and there's a lot of overlap there as well. But we saw shades of Pacific Rim, and particularly its visual stylings, its on-the-ground setup, its gritty aesthetic, recently with Godzilla vs. Kong, and I would argue it was one of the more successful elements of Godzilla vs. Kong.
Right. And Van, last but not the least, Starship Troopers, 1997. The storyline is pretty straightforward, and it's not very hard to follow, but still, you know, it managed to catch a lot of eyeballs back then.
It was pretty groundbreaking when it opened. I was 15 when Starship Troopers opened. I remember the very first ad with Blur's Song 2 playing over the top of it. And it is a ludicrous, ridiculous movie, in much the same way that Pacific Rim is a ludicrous, ridiculous movie. However, it's got so much going for it. It is directed by Paul Verhoeven, who, of course, by that point had given us RoboCop and given us Total Recall. It is written by Ed Neumeyer, who gave us a RoboCop as well. It's adapted from classic science fiction novel Robert A. Heinlein, and it's got a cast of up-and-comers who are specifically chosen, as we are told by director Paul Verhoeven, specifically on the basis that they could basically act, but they were very pretty. And that kind of lends itself to what the generally thought of legacy of the film is, which is it's a dumb, pretty movie. Yes, it's very specifically meant to be a movie rooted in the aesthetic and the aesthetic of 1930s German visuals.
Right, and we must appreciate that the special effects for 1997 are pretty much impressive, like way ahead of their time.
They still hold up to this day. I see, I constantly see movies with special effects that do not even compare to Starship Troopers. I showed this to my girlfriend's 15-year-old son, and his response to it was not as positive as I would have liked. But it still goes down relatively well to anybody you show the movie to today, because so much of it is practical, and at the same time it has some groundbreaking CG effect. And that, I think, is down to that Jurassic Park principle of do as much of it practically as you can, and then smooth over the edges with the CGI.
Right, and to some critics, the movie only made to a certain level because of the acting. Had it been released in today's time, these days acting is always compromised if there is like a whole lot of special effects package. in a certain movie, it can cover the loopholes that are created by the acting. So what are your thoughts on that?
I would argue nowadays we care a lot less about performances, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, we are very much. I mean, it's worth noting as well. If you did Starship Troopers today, which noticeably is a movie that has never had a proper big budget blockbuster reboot. It has been rebooted a couple of times in different forms. But if you made Starship Troopers for the very first time today, it would be on a streaming platform, and it would be as part of a commitment to make 6 sequels. And maybe a streaming series spin-off as well. But the performances in it, I think now they would be too conscious. The idea that Paul Verhoeven hired specifically dodgy actors, which is, we're being polite about it. I think that they're perfectly fun. They suit the material very well, but I'm very aware that the material has been designed that way. And I think anybody watching the film very quickly gets the idea that this is not being played completely serious. We are sort of being meta. I think nowadays they would think too much about it.
Right. And Van, there's something common about all these 3 movies that we chose today to review. It's the story being all over the place. It doesn't seem to be, collected. It doesn't seem to be at one page. It's all over the place. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, I disagree. First of all, Scooby-Doo, really fun mystery. It's a fun teen mystery, very much in the style of a classic Scooby-Doo movie. Having said that, it's written by James Gunn. It does get subversive with itself. It does have a neat little twist in the tale as well. And also Rowan Atkinson in there as Mr. Mondavarius. I think it's just good fun. Pacific Rim is a lot more of a straightforward film. There aren't really many twists and turns in that one. But Starship Troopers is a movie that I would argue is a sharper, more insightful movie, incisive movie as well, today than it was in 1997, because the things it says about propaganda, about how governments can manipulate their people, about populations in times of war and things like that, are things that resonate more with audiences 25 years later for the things that we've seen across the world within the last 25 years than did then.
Right. Van, it was so much fun discussing these movies with you. Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure to share.